Hey everyone, what's going on? I'm the Timmeister and welcome back to Rockport. In this episode, I'm going to be building the city's central business district or downtown area. And this is going to be no small task, as is with any other city that I've ever built. Creating an iconic skyline in any city is very, very challenging, especially when you're dealing with only vanilla assets. But thankfully, with all of the DLCs that have been released, it's going to be a bit easier than a lot of other times where I've had to do this. I'm going to be using two main DLCs in this episode. One is the Japan pack, and the other is the Skyscrapers Content Creator pack. So between these two DLCs, there is plenty of really, really great, highly detailed skyscrapers that fit well into pretty much any city. So my first order was placing down every single building included in these DLCs, and what I'm going to do after that is sift through them to see which ones can fit into the downtown. Because Rockport, while it is a major city, it's not going to be a metropolis like New York or London. It's still going to be a relatively small city by world standards. So I'm not going to want to place down every one of these skyscrapers, and in fact, I'm not going to place down a lot of the tall buildings just because they are a little too grandiose for the city. I mean, the city is kind of concentrated to this main peninsula, and I only have a limited amount of room, so I don't want to fill in the entire peninsula with skyscrapers. That would be a little bit unrealistic, and it would kind of ruin the overall scale of the city. So I have to be mindful of which skyscrapers I place and which ones I disregard. As you can see here, I placed down pretty much every skyscraper just on the outskirts of downtown where I know there won't be any tall buildings right away. And I'm simply just going to move whichever buildings I want into the downtown area in their respective locations. So there it is. That actually looks really cool as is. It kind of looks like an area of Manhattan or something. It's actually pretty cool. So here I'm automatically going to remove all the taller versions of each building just because I find the shorter versions are plenty tall. And this is where one of the biggest downfalls of the game really shows, and that is scaling. You'll see that all of these ploppable skyscrapers are many times larger than the largest growable building in the game. And that's just because of improper scaling. So these buildings are set to like a sort of 1-to-1 scale of whatever building they're modeled on, but they're so much bigger than all of the growable buildings because the growable buildings are limited to a 4x4 zoned square, whereas these ploppable buildings that they can be as big as the creator wants them to be, right? So it's a little bit immersion breaking in some cases, although it's not too bad. And this is one of the reasons why I have to get rid of the most taller buildings in this DLC. And that's because they're just so overwhelmingly huge compared to the growable buildings, and they just wouldn't mix quite well. But the smaller versions of each building are a respectable size. They can blend in quite well with any zoned buildings that may be around them. And you can still get some pretty decent results. But while we're on that topic, I'll say that from what we've seen so far in City Skylines 2, the scaling of the buildings looks much more appropriate. Of course, with the zones being much larger in City Skylines 2, it can be up to 6x6 zoned squares. We may be able to see these sort of scaled buildings appear just from zones without being ploppable. So that's getting me really, really excited. It's going to allow us to create much more realistic and believable cities. So that'll be super fun. So for downtown Rockport, I'm going to try my hardest to get it to look as much like Auckland as I possibly can. And you'll notice that right in the middle of the central business district, I placed down the Sky Tower, or what looks the closest to the Sky Tower, right in the middle. And surrounding it is going to be a big collection of some averagely tall skyscrapers. I noticed that Auckland doesn't necessarily have a huge skyline like you'll find in a lot of Australian cities, such as like Sydney and Melbourne. You know, you'll see these giant 50-plus story buildings all over. Auckland doesn't have much of that. And to my surprise, after doing a little bit of research, the tallest building in New Zealand only has, I think it was like 47 floors or something like that. I forget the exact number, but it was in the 40s, which is not that tall. And, but as you can see here, the Sky Tower, or I guess we'll have to give it a new name, but let's just call it the Sky Tower for now. It actually is the tallest building in the city. And that's what I was going for. I wanted this tower to be the tallest building in the city, just like the Sky Tower in Auckland. The only problem is the Sky Tower in Auckland is like twice the height of the tallest building in the city. Unfortunately, that's not the case in Rockport. But as long as it's the tallest building in the city, I'm happy with that. And unfortunately, these buildings are not functional. They function as unique buildings, so they don't actually provide jobs. They just attract tourists, which is great. It's going to attract people to the downtown area, and it's just going to make it look a little bit more bustling. But unfortunately, they're not functional like zoned buildings. So that's why I'm going to put an importance on placing a lot of zoned buildings in between these big skyscrapers, and a lot of buildings in the downtown core are going to be wall to wall. So I'm going to be clipping buildings together and using a lot of move it at the base of these skyscrapers to create maybe like some urban shopping malls, or you know, some whatever wall-to-wall buildings I can come up with. But in this episode, I'm not really going to touch on that too much. I'm mostly going to focus on creating the iconic skyline that I'm looking for this city. And this is totally subjective, by the way. So I'm creating this skyline. It doesn't mean that this is the way to do it. And this is why I didn't really want to formulate this video to be a tutorial on how to build a realistic skyline, because it's totally up to you. And there's no truly realistic way to do this, because every city is different. Just go on Google Maps and look at any city in any part of the world, and their central business districts, if they even have one, is always totally different, right? So I'm just trying to create something that looks relatively similar to Auckland, and that's basically what I'm going for. And I think I actually created a skyline that's slightly bigger than Auckland's. Auckland doesn't have a huge collection of really tall skyscrapers at all, as I was just talking about. It's still a relatively small city. But let me know down in the comments, guys, what you think of how this skyline turned out. Now, it's subject to change, and it's going to change, actually, because as I fill in the blanks between these tall skyscrapers, it's going to change the skyline a little bit. But at least we got the start, we got the base down, and we can just kind of expand from here. So let me know down in the comments what you think. I really like some of the buildings that are included with the Japanese content creator pack, just because they're much more wide than they are tall, and they can act as like these sort of downtown malls that you'll often find, and sometimes they occupy like an entire block, which is really cool. It can serve as filler if you don't know what to place in a certain area, but overall they just look really cool. They're very, very well detailed, the buildings that are included in this DLC, so they fit well into pretty much any downtown. So for this next part, I'm going to be placing down some growable buildings. So I suppose they're kind of considered ploppable because I'm plopping them down, but I'll just call them growable because that's what they are normally. So I am going to place down some growable buildings just to get a feel of how these vanilla buildings interact with the content creator pack buildings. At this point, I was just kind of curious to see how this was all going to come together, and I recorded it, so it made the cut. But overall, I'm actually really impressed how these buildings kind of mesh together, and you can really get a sense of scale. So these growable buildings that I'm placing down are among the largest of the growable buildings, and you can just see how tiny they are. They're completely overshadowed by these content creator pack buildings. So that's fine if you're just going to be using growable buildings, but then the number of buildings that you have access to is quite limited. So using a mixture of both is can get some pretty interesting results. So I guess here's an example of like some commercial shopping areas that may be at the base of some of the larger buildings, and this is often and this is quite common in a lot of cities as well. You'll have like stores and retail space in the bottom floors of big skyscrapers, and then you'll have offices, maybe some condos or apartments on the upper floors. So what I'm gonna have to do for the downtown area is work my way from block to block and place these sort of commercial areas at the base of a lot of the skyscrapers. Now, it's not always going to be the case. You know, you can always build a little pavilion or maybe like a little plaza at the base of one of these tall skyscrapers, but in some cases, but it's going to vary from building to building. Now, after a lot of building placement, I realized I can't neglect our public transportation network. And I realized that we have this giant train station right smack dab in the middle of the downtown, and it's connected up to a metro system, or a metro line. So I thought it would be a great idea to start building the metro network before filling in all of these blocks and stuff with buildings, and then I would have no more room. So that is what I'm going to be doing for the next little bit in this episode, is designing, I guess, the central part of the metro network. And it's going to be quite extensive, but not too much. I'm basing this totally on Auckland's metro network, which includes 4 lines. Most of them head north to south, but in this case, the downtown is sort of going to be the middle of the metro area, and we're going to have like a north, south, east, west line spreading out. So it's sort of like a hub and spoke system. And this line here going to the train station is kind of an anomaly because it's going to be its own independent line. So I had to do quite a bit of studying and thinking about how I was going to make this metro network work. But I think it's going to be pretty functional, you know, for a totally plopped, painted city. I think this metro network should function fairly well. And I'm going to try to use some of these DLC stations as well. So as you saw, I placed down this sort of cross metro station. I believe it's included with plazas and promenades, if I'm not mistaken. It's a really cool station. It functions well as a hub, or like a main hub in the downtown of your city. But throughout the city, I'm going to try to place down all of the different metro stations and train stations, whatever I can, just to create some variety. Most of the metro network is going to be underground. However, this is the only line that's above ground. And that's just because of the giant glass box train station I decided to use in Rockport. So this is pretty interesting. What you're looking at here is a metro network map for the city of Auckland. And as you'll notice, there's some lines that run parallel to each other. And they're more than likely running along the same tracks, or at least the same set of tracks. And what's interesting is some of the lines actually merge back into each other, and then they split off at other points in the network. And I'm gonna have to do a similar setup here in Rockport, just because of the city's geography. The main core of the city is built up on a peninsula, and there's only a certain number of ways out. So that means that some of the lines going out are going to run parallel to each other, and then they're going to split off in their respective directions. So there's going to be like I think it's the eastern and the southern line that is going to run parallel and then split off at a certain point. But overall, the metro network should have some similarities to Auckland, which is pretty exciting. And these metro stations that are also included in the Plazas and Promenades DLC look very cool. A lot better than just the default ones that come with the base game. And like most things I do in City Skylines, a lot of it gets rebuilt for one reason or another. There's a lot of trial and error that's involved with these things, and in this case with the elevated metro line, I didn't really like the positioning of the elevated stations. I thought it would be a little better suited to place them closer to the shoreline, just because I'm going to have another underground metro line running not too far from here. So I just wanted to have enough distance between them. And it also sets me up a little bit better to connect this elevated line to the rest of the underground network. It just gave me a little bit more room to connect everything together underground. And you may have been wondering to yourself, what is going to happen to this metro line that goes to the train station? Well, this is going to be a terminus station, both for rail and the metro. So just to plug the other end of this rail station, I ended up plopping this shopping mall. And to my surprise, it actually fit perfect just along the train station. It almost looks like it's part of the building, which is what I wanted. And that's going to be that. So for the remainder of this episode, I'm mostly going to be focusing on some small details around the downtown area. I was actually really excited to detail this particular spot because I knew that it was going to be treed in and you know, this very densely lush area, as is most of Auckland. And that's actually one of my favorite things about the city, is it's the fact that it's very green. The city almost looks like it's making a conscious effort to preserve a lot of forests and a lot of green spaces. It almost seems like every little nook and cranny that's in between buildings is just filled with trees and these beautiful hedges and whatnot. So I want to keep that sort of trend going in Rockport. Hence why, you know, I'm making this forest here sort of in between this interchange. And then that's another thing as well, like even between highway interchanges, it's all trees. You know, there's no like open green space like there is, like maybe a good example would be like the 401 in Toronto. You know, you drive along the 401 And beside the highways and in between the medians, it's all just fields, right? Most of that land, I'm sure, was probably farmland at one point, so there wouldn't have been a lot of trees to begin with. But in Auckland, it just seems that everything is just kind of nestled in between this really thick brush. And it looks very unique. It's very cool. Alright guys, well, I'm going to wrap it up. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. It was honestly a ton of fun to build the city center, and I'm excited to further build on what we've done today. So in the next episode, I'm probably going to fill in the blanks between all of these really tall buildings, fill in all of the city blocks, and really start to get into the nitty-gritty of downtown, and then we can eventually start to expand outwards and onwards. So let me know down in the comments, guys, what you think of what we've built today, and stay tuned to the end of this episode where I'll give you guys a nice glimpse of what we've built today. Also included in the cinematics is going to be a tiny sneak peek of what's to come. I'm not going to mention what it is. I'll let you guys notice for yourselves what you think it is. It's just a tiny little detail. It's not too hard to miss. But yeah, I won't say any more. So guys, as usual, thank you very much for watching. Leave a like, leave a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And until the next episode, take care, everyone.